The Sine Institute of Policy and Politics is American University's incubator for policy innovation. We convene leaders in the academic, public, private, nonprofit, and journalism sectors to engage and promote common ground and nonpartisan solutions. In an evolving world, we seize the opportunity to work on the nation's most pressing challenges through collaboration by experts and top scholars in their field with students in research and scholarship. As part of that goal, the Sine Institute leverages American University's location in our nation's capital, the nexus of government and a growing international business center. We connect diverse perspectives from around the country and around the world with our world-class academics and research, experienced practitioners, and the most politically active student body in the U.S. We stand apart through our focus on the role of business and the nonprofit community in public policy, the rise of the importance of economic regions in the United States, and international policy issues. Our focus is to make an immediate impact at the intersection of policy and politics that leads to real and lasting change. Thank you for joining us as we convene, communicate, and collaborate. Introducing Sine Institute Fellow 2022, Julián Castro.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first seminar with Secretary Julián Castro. First and foremost, I'd like to welcome Amy Dacey, the Executive Director of the Sine Institute, Lanesa Clarkson, who's the Administrative Assistant of the Sine Institute, as well as some notable AU leadership who happen to also be members of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. We want to welcome the CFO and Vice President and Treasurer of the University, Bronte Burley-Jones, Diana Burley, the Vice Provost of Research, Dean of the School of Education, Cheryl Holcomb-McCoy, and Edwina Sims, the Senior Director for Multicultural and Affinity Engagement. We also want to welcome our Dean of the School of Political Affairs, Dean Vicki Wilkins, as well as author and professor of the Department of Public Administration and the Director of Metropolitan Policy Center, Professor Derek Hyra. Secretary Castro served as U.S. Secretary of Housing and Urban Development under President Barack Obama from 2014 to 2017. Before that, he was mayor of his native San Antonio, Texas, the youngest mayor of a top 50 American city at the time. In 2012, he gave a rousing keynote speech at the Democratic National Convention, during which he described the American dream as a relay to be passed from generation to generation. After his historic campaign for president in 2020, Secretary Castro launched the People First Future in May to help elect bold, progressive candidates whose campaigns are focused on improving the lives of all people they hope to represent. In September, Secretary Castro launched Our America with Julián Castro, a podcast with Flamata Media that puts a spotlight on vulnerable communities and takes a humanizing and hopeful look at how drastically the American experience shifts from one person to the next. In July, Secretary Castro became a MSNBC political analyst. Also, we have with us Secretary Marcia Fudge, who is the 18th Secretary of the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development. Throughout her career, Secretary Fudge has worked to help low-income families, seniors, and communities across the country. She served as a U.S. Representative for the 11th Congressional District of Ohio from 2008 to March 9, 2021. She was a member of several congressional caucuses and the past chair of the Congressional Black Caucus. As a member of Congress, Secretary Fudge earned a reputation of tackling the unique challenges of her district by working with her congressional delegation and across political ideologies, and she also is the former president of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. I give you Secretaries Fudge and Castro.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Fudge, and welcome to American University.
Thank you.
I just want to say thank you to Jeremy and also to Sophia, our student associates who have taken a lead on this session. Let's give them a round of applause for their work. And to all of the student associates and to Amy and Lanesa, to all of you who are here, it's a pleasure. I think this is the first in-person session like this that they've done since the pandemic started. This is part of the great work of the Sine Institute. And you know, the focus, Madam Secretary, of our sessions is on doing things differently in order to benefit the most vulnerable Americans out there. And so I'm truly thrilled to have you here today. I can't think of somebody better to speak to those issues because of all of your experience, both in Congress and now, of course, at the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Last night was a big night, of course. I hope everybody watched the State of the Union. And I guess I wanted to start off by asking you to sort of reflect on your journey. You were no stranger to Washington, D.C. before you became the 18th Secretary of HUD last year. You had served several terms as the representative for part of Ohio, I think around Cleveland. And so you had all of that legislative experience. What's been the biggest difference to you in terms of working in the executive branch, either the satisfaction or dissatisfaction or sense of accomplishment that you get from the legislative branch versus the executive branch?
First, thanks for having me. I think the biggest difference, and remember, I came from executive before I went to legislative. I was mayor of a small city, so
True.
It was a place I was very comfortable with. But what I appreciate about what I do now, as opposed to the legislative branch, is that I am closer to people. I know it sounds difficult because I'm up here at HUD, but I get an opportunity to go and talk to people all the time. And when I was a mayor, mayors are the people who are closest to the people. And I think that what it does is it gives you a better idea and it makes you understand what people are going through. You know, we think that we live in this bubble and we think everybody pays attention to what we say. They do not. Most of them don't even care what we think. What they care about is what kind of schools their kids go to. If people shovel the snow off the street, or police come when they call, or the fire department comes when they're needed, or how they feed their kids, or how their kid goes to school when we are not in school and they have no broadband or internet. So what I appreciate is going back to what makes me the public servant I have always wanted to be.
And I mentioned the State of the Union last night. The President mentioned briefly affordable housing opportunity. And I know that you've had the chance, I think on a number of occasions, to travel with the President. I did that recently. I heard that you're going to do that again soon. What would you say are the administration's top priorities right now when it comes to providing greater affordable housing opportunity?
Mr. Secretary, you know, we got these two secretaries, so it's Mr. Secretary, and you know, I'm just comfortable really with Marcia, but you know, whatever. In this time of inflation, if we do not deal with housing, we will never deal with inflation. Housing is the most expensive driver of inflation in the country today. When you realize the fact that we are in a situation where there's certainly not enough supply for the demand. So what is happening is because we have not invested in housing for more than 50 years in this country, really invested in it. It has finally caught up with us. And so because there's so little supply, the people who have housing have made the prices so high, there is no more affordable housing in this country. And until we can take some stress off the housing market, we are not going to deal with inflation. So my discussions with the President, and primarily he gives us three charges. The first is to look at housing through a lens of equity, because we have still, even in our department, things that have been ingrained but they are still so racist that we need to try to root out some of them. Secondly, find a way to put more housing, more low-income and moderate housing into the market. And so we're doing that through things like CDBG and Home and Housing Trust Fund and LIHTC and increasing the caps on LIHTC, all the kinds of things that we know that we can do. And third, and just as importantly, is to make sure that people, black and brown people in particular, who otherwise would qualify for a mortgage and are inhibited or stopped because maybe they have too much student loan debt, which is a number one driver, or other reasons, to be sure that we now level the playing field. And so I think that we have done that by putting in new tools and making some changes in how FHA secures mortgages. So those are the three things that I'm really charged to do. But then I add as well public housing. You know, most of our public housing is more than 50 years old. We have not maintained it. We have not invested in it. And so we are finding ourselves in a position where we have not done any real capital improvements, and it has caught up with us to a point where I am embarrassed and ashamed to go into some places that are public housing, that we will allow people in this country to let people live that way.
And I wanted to ask you about people who find themselves often in public housing, also people who find themselves without housing at all, folks who are homeless. During the Obama administration, President Obama and First Lady Michelle Obama made it a top priority to end veteran homelessness. And between 2010 and 2016, there was a 47% reduction in veteran homelessness because they got the buy-in of mayors and governors and 19 different federal agencies. All of that took a step backward during the Trump years. How is the administration focused on getting that effort to effectively end homelessness back on track?
There are a few things we're doing. First off, the thing that I think hurt us the most is that my predecessor would go to the Congress and request a 30% reduction in his budget every year. The craziest thing I have ever heard in my life.
And Madam Secretary, you could explain to students that that's not, and many folks may know, but most people ask for more money.
More money. You don't say, cut my budget by 30%. Especially when you know that more than 500,000 people sleep on the streets of this country every night, in the richest country in the world. And close to 200,000 of them are veterans. People who have served this country are sleeping on the street. Some of it economic, some of it other issues. So one of the things that we've done, and I'm so pleased that the President made this a priority, when we passed the American Rescue Plan, bipartisan, there was $10 billion set aside just to address homelessness. 70,000 vouchers, and then an additional $5 billion for people to find ways to create permanent housing. And so some cities bought hotels. Some people took old shelters and started to make them into, instead of congregate places, make them so that people could live there on a stable, long-term basis. We have people who are building new housing. We have a city that just built like 14 or 15 tiny homes for veterans to get them off the street. So we're doing a lot of things. We have the resources to do it. The problem with the vouchers, though, quite frankly, is that because there's a lack of affordable rental housing as well, we've got vouchers but can't use them. So we're doing our part, and we as well have started a program that is called House America. I happen to right now chair the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness. And so we have created a program that we are asking mayors, governors, tribal leaders, et cetera, to commit to us a number that they will say, I'm going to take 100 homeless people off the street and house them permanently. So we have people all over the country who are making commitments. Some cities as many as thousands. So we've got about 70 communities and cities that are involved in this right now. We just want to continue to grow it. Because the one thing about it is we can't do it by ourselves. There are those who love government and those who hate it. Government does have a purpose. And anybody that thinks we don't really does not understand our system of government. But we can't do it by ourselves.
I mean, you mentioned getting buy-in from local communities, tribal communities, and so forth. And one of the hardest things to do in our country is, in addition to providing shelter for those who are unsheltered and then moving them into permanent housing, it's that permanent housing for people who are extremely low income. Right. Extremely low income being people making less than 30% of area median income. That's where the biggest gap is. how do you see our efforts going to boost the number of units and housing opportunity for people, especially at the bottom end of the income scale?
There are a number of things we're doing. I work obviously closely with Dennis McDonough, who is making sure that he can do his part on the veteran piece, and I think we're doing a pretty good job at it. It is not profitable for investors and builders to build very low income housing, and that's why they don't do it, because it's not profitable. So when we start to create resources that can help them close their gaps and make money, then they tend to be encouraged to build. And so when we decided to take the cap off, raise the cap on LIHTC, we started a new tax credit. We are asking communities to assist with resources. We're putting more money into the home program, which is kind of flexible and allows them to assist communities. But what it really takes, quite honestly, is a will to do it. You know, we live in a country where everybody says they want to help somebody, but they don't want to let them live in their backyard.
Yeah.
You know, they want to help, but they don't want poor people to live by them, so they really don't want to help. And so until we can find a way to pull all of the people together that make a difference. If you live in a community where your zoning rules say that you have to build a house out of brick, it's going to be twice as much as it would to build a stick house. Or if you live in a community that says you have to have a certain size lot, or you can only build a single family home as opposed to a 4-unit building, those are the things that prevent us from building. But what we are doing when we don't allow people to move to communities of choice, communities of opportunity, we are segregating poverty in this country. And as long as we segregate poverty, we are never going to be the kind of society we should be. And so when we start to put the resources in to assist them, we're even doing things, so you know, for a long time, FHA and most banks would not loan or secure a mortgage that was less than $100,000. Well, we're doing that again because we have these communities that are dying because they have vacant and abandoned houses. You might be able to buy one for $30,000 or $40,000, but we won't lend you the money. So if we don't lend you the money, you can't buy it and then rehabilitate it. So they go to flippers, and it just creates a vicious cycle. So we're trying to break those cycles. It's like, you know the size of the organization. It's like trying to turn an ocean liner, and we just like maybe made a quarter turn. But we're moving, and we're doing some things we know we need to do.
Yeah, I was just thinking that in a few days we're going to hit the 2-year mark of this pandemic. It started, around, I think, March 12th, 13th, basically when things started shutting down in 2020. And during that time, of course, we had millions of people who found themselves on the brink of eviction. We still have millions of people that are behind on rent. There were monies that were allocated by Congress, about $46 or $47 billion in emergency rental assistance that went through the states, and the states were supposed to make sure that that money got into local communities and ultimately into the hands of landlords and renters. But what we found was that many states did not do a very good job at all of distributing money that was needed. Right. What do you think happened there with some of those states, and how do you think that they should improve, and does HUD have a role in helping them to improve? Hopefully we won't find ourselves in the same kind of situation, but what are the lessons learned, do you think, for the states that did not do the kind of job that we would want them to do with those monies?
The first thing I would suggest is that those states that did the poorest job were the states that already had problems with poverty in the first place. All that COVID did was just expose the poverty we already had, the lack of health care we already had, the fact that there are certain communities that have been evicting people for a long time for any little reason. So by giving the $46 billion to Treasury, Treasury sends the money to the states, but it was HUD that actually did the technical assistance because Treasury doesn't have that set up. But the biggest problem with the Secretary is that When Congress set up the money, they designed it as a new program. So communities had to stand up a brand new program as opposed to be able to send it through the same kinds of things.
Which is more cumbersome, just takes longer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That was the biggest problem. And in addition to that, we had already given out, you know, the Congress had passed CARES money and COVID money. So these communities had all this money and they had no idea what to do with it. So what they started doing was spending the money they needed to spend first. So if the CARES or COVID money said you have to spend it in 6 months, they'd spend it and they would save the eviction money. So by the time we figured out what was going on, then we helped them stand up programs. But you have to understand, only big cities like the ones you come from really have the capacity to do it. Most smaller communities don't have people that can stand up a program that quickly or to run a program that quick. They don't have the staff. They don't have the skill set. And so the way we rolled it out was just bad. But then in addition, I think that states, because they were so afraid to make a mistake, made the process more cumbersome by asking for every single little detail about somebody's life instead of taking the chance to make sure that we don't put people in the
Like
street.
living up to the red tape
Exactly.
caricature, basically.
And every state did it differently. Some states did it extremely well. And others, and then there too, just to be perfectly honest, some governors that didn't think that they should have the money in the first place. And so they just didn't spend it. Because these people didn't need help. They needed to be evicted. It's the country we live in.
You mentioned the challenge that racism still plays and bigotry still plays in our housing market. And you mentioned FHA is a great example of an agency that used to be part of the problem and sanctioned redlining and basically kept especially Black Americans from housing opportunity. And these days, at least as far as I remember, more than 40% of Black first-time home buyers got an FHA-insured mortgage. I mean, it's part of the solution now. But we know that there's still real challenges out there. In the Obama administration, we did affirmatively furthering fair housing, which essentially was a piece of unfinished business from the 1968 Fair Housing Act that required local jurisdictions to come up with a plan for equal housing opportunity. When Trump came in, under Secretary Carson under Trump, they put that on ice. You actually are going forward with AFFH. How is that going?
You know, it's going quite well. I think, though, that there were some tweaks that communities wanted to make, and we've listened to what those are to make it better. But the one thing that the country has to know is that fair housing is the law of the land. They also have to know that you talk about redlining is, you know, so much changed, but it still exists today in even what we do. When you start saying you're not going to make loans under a certain amount of money, most of those neighborhoods are communities of color. See, I must be saying something I'm not supposed to say. Because this is, and the other thing I think that is important for people to understand is that in 1968, when we passed the Fair Housing Law, the gap between Black and white home ownership today is bigger than it was then. It's bigger now than it was in 1968. So we're still not doing some things right. But with AFFH, we are basically putting the country back on notice. You're going to meet these requirements so that we can be assured that you are following the fair housing laws of this country. And so that's what we're doing now, and we're rolling it out. I think you're going to be very, very pleased. I don't know where we are in the process. Do you know, Victoria? Victoria's the other side of my brain.
We have a final rule coming in the spring.
See?
There you go. Yeah,
All right, so we have a final rule coming in the spring. Plus, you know, the disparate impact rule, which basically says that we don't really care what you intended to do, but if the outcome, if the impact or effect is discriminatory, then it is wrong. So those two rules, I think, are going to change the game, just as they always have.
Well, and I just have a couple more questions. We wanted to allow the students to ask some questions they had. I'm going to ask one of my student associates to just flag for me when we have about 10 or 15 minutes left. And I'm notoriously bad at keeping time, so I want to respect your time. just a question about, I think, an issue that a lot of folks grapple with, but was always bedeviled us at HUD, and I think is still tough, which is that of displacement. A lot of folks out there, especially in well-populated urban communities, who, whether it's in New Orleans or it's in Austin, East Austin, Texas, or Chicago, or wherever it is, my hometown of San Antonio, folks who have been living there for a long time, often residents of color, that are getting displaced as the housing prices go up. What is your reflection on what local communities should be thinking about, and perhaps how HUD or the federal government is thinking about being helpful or addressing that?
You know, unfortunately, gentrification really is a local issue for the most part. But one of the things that we are looking at, and there is in the president's new budget, there is about, well, in the housing supply part of the budget, there's about $10 billion to talk with communities about how they go about taxation, how they go about zoning and planning, because those are all of the things that allow people to come in and take over communities. Where I live right now in D.C., you know, I'm from Ohio. I'm from Cleveland, Ohio originally. And so when I came here, first off, it was just total sticker shock, and that's been 15 years ago. I'm like, this costs what? You know, in my neighborhood, I could have bought 2 houses for what I paid for this condo I have. But what has happened now, just because of where I live in Southwest, they built a wharf, right? I can't afford to move because I can't afford to buy anything else. And so when we get people in those, but what I'm also seeing, because the values have gone up so much, is that my elderly neighbors are being taxed out of their neighborhood. Because all it takes is for somebody to come in and start to raise the values. And so the tax rates go up. And so it's pushing people out of their homes. We have to start to talk about how we keep core communities, not just diverse, but fair. Because people with money will just come in and destroy a community. And I'm not saying people shouldn't live how they want to live, but I think that there should be some restraints on what we allow people to do. We should not allow people to come into our inner cities and just buy up 10 or 12 houses and build a mansion and then make everybody else pay for it. So there have to be some things, some restraints, but it really is something we're working to help do by having the discussion, but it really is much more a local issue than it is a national one.
And one of the questions I wanted to ask you as you reflect on your public service journey, and I think about all the students here, some of whom hopefully will go into public service
Let's
in
hope
some
so.
form. Maybe not everybody into politics. Please don't everybody become a politician, but I'm very confident that folks will find some way to contribute, including some people through public service. Like, what was the best piece of advice that you ever got when it comes to either your career or public service, or just in general, that you think they should hear?
The best piece of advice I ever received, it was so simple. Louis Stokes, the congressman that had been in my seat prior, he said to me, if you take care of the people will take care of you. And it's always been my motto. I am a public servant. This is what I do. This is what I do. This is what I am called to do. And I'm very happy doing it. But when I talk to young people, one of the things that I always ask them is, what do you want your country to look like? I'm at a point where I'm comfortable. They're going to have to carry me out of this little house I live in, and it's fine with me. I've worked hard. I've done okay. Never going to be wealthy. I work for the government, so I'm never going to be wealthy. But what kind of country do you want to live in? Do you want to live in a country where half the people do well and half the people don't? Where half the people eat and half the people don't? Where we don't take care of our children or our parents? What kind of world do you want to live in? Do you have to have the same big house that your parents and grandparents had? I don't know. Because, see, it's not going to be up to me. It's going to be up to you. You know, are you willing to live in a modular house, or a house that's built in a way that's less costly, that's more sustainable, that can stand up to climate change? Are you going to continue to let people build houses by Superfund sites and brownfields? What kind of country do you want to live in? And so I just say to you, whether you become a public servant or not is all right with me. I mean, it's something that I hope you will do, because I'm not going to be doing this a whole lot longer. But what I would say to you is find the time to help somebody less fortunate than yourself. Because if you do not, this country is going to continue to spiral out of control like it is right now. You know, people laugh when they say, you know, I worked across the aisle. I did, because I knew no matter what your party, you still had poor people. You still had people who needed things. You still had hungry children. We all have those. But what I see is people who will drive by homeless encampments so many times that they become invisible. Or who will see public schools that don't have heat in the winter or air conditioning in the summer and think it's okay. At some point, we have to take responsibility for ourselves and our neighbors. And if you're not willing to do that, then I feel very, very sorry for the future of this country. We have to be better than what we are. Housing is a perfect example. There should be no one in this country that lives like some of the people I see. No one. You know, people say, well, it's their own fault, pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. I hear all that garbage. Sometimes it's true. But you have to have boots first. They'll say, everybody, you know, rising tide lifts all boats. You got to be in the boat. So let's not be cavalier about what our responsibilities are. All I can do is hope that you will do the right thing. That's all I can do is hope. So.
Well, thank you for
Thank you.
those inspiring words. All right. I want to give our students a few minutes to ask Secretary Fudge some questions, and Jeremy
Not hard questions.
and Sophia have the microphones.
Yes.
Oh, that's great. Oh, thank you so much. This has been really awesome. I had a question about messaging and kind of what you were talking about with the not in my backyard policies. I was a beneficiary of rental assistance last year and I really appreciated it. But I saw people, friends of mine, and people in sort of middle-class neighborhoods who would have, you know, Bernie Sanders signs and Black Lives Matter signs, who at the same point would be fighting against bringing multi-unit housing into their neighborhoods. I talked to a friend, first-time home buyer, who said that, well, the value of her home doubled, right? So why would she want that to lower? How do you, I guess, like the politics of guilt, like how do you actually make people care and make people accountable? I mean, the donor class and Democratic voters, how do you message them that this is their problem?
Well, one of the things I say, and I had this discussion with a student about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and one of the students said to me, well, why do we want to do anything about the housing market, because we're making so much money? And if you put more housing, it's going to reduce first off, you're not going to really lose any money. Housing is going to continue to go up. But more importantly, their taxes are going to keep going up too, because you're going to have to take care of people who need your help one way or another. It's either you're going to have to pay for their health care, you're going to have to pay for their prison care, they're going to be responsible to us in some way. I said to one of my staff the other day, we were complaining about taxes. If I had to pay more taxes, I would do it if I knew that my taxes were helping somebody that needed help. I'd be happy to do it, because I alone cannot put enough money aside to take care of another human being. But collectively, we can. You just have to, all I can tell you is you just have to appeal to their better angels, because people who are selfish are going to be selfish. But I think that you have to engage in the conversation and the responsibility we have as citizens of this country, but as well as what it is going to cost them. You know, people talk about, perfect example, people will talk about the cost of insurance. Insurance is as high as it is because they assume so many people won't have it. They charge you an extra $1,000 or $2,000 to be sure that they take care of the people who are not insured. So just think, if everybody had insurance, your bill would be $2,000 less. Or just think, if people had a decent place to live, we wouldn't maybe need as much social service money as we spend today. And so I think that it is also a pocketbook issue as well as it is a personal issue. But some people just don't understand what they are really doing to other people. I mean, you don't need a 2-acre lot. I mean, how much grass you want to cut? So, let's talk about some of the things that maybe they might be willing to listen to, but I wish I had an answer. I really, truly don't.
Hi, thank you for being here. I hope this question isn't difficult, but you mentioned earlier about states not streamlining the money appropriately to those that need it. So I'm just wondering, how do you think HUD could improve or hold states accountable to appropriately spend in for HUD programs for specifically affordable housing?
Well, I can assure because I run it. But that is really true, and I tell you why. This class talks about the intersection of politics. It makes a difference who you elect. Because when you put people in place, like you or others, to make the right choices, you have to believe that we will. Every single person in a position of authority has an awful lot of authority, just like we had. But you want to be sure that the people who are there are the people who care. The one thing I can say about Joe Biden, and I'm not really being political in any way, shape, or form, is he leads with his heart and not his head. So when he knows that something needs to be done, he empowers us to do it. I believe in accountability. I've been an elected official for 30 years. I believe in transparency. I invite anyone that wants to know how we spend our resources to ask, because I will tell you. But the other thing we do is it has to come from the top. Your people have to understand where we are going. Just tell you, I mean, I'm a person of very, very strong faith, right? And so one of the very first things I said to my staff, I talked to them about the story of Nehemiah in the Bible. And in the story of Nehemiah, he was trying to build back the walls of Jerusalem. And every time he would get higher and higher, somebody would try to stop him, and they'd say, "Come down, we need to talk to you." But Nehemiah kept building the wall. Finally, he said to them, "Why should I come down and stop my work to talk to you? We are doing a great work, and I will not come down." That is what I think about HUD. We are doing a great work, and we will not come down. We're going to keep doing our work as long as we can do it. But everybody has to be on the same page, marching together in the same direction. And if they are not, they need to go someplace other than HUD. That's my job, is to move that agency to a place where people know we care, where we make their lives better, where we do the job that we are intended to do. And that is what I intend to do. That's what I think.
Hello, my name is Cristian Benavides. I'm from San Antonio, Texas. I've got a question for both of you. The first part is directed to you, though, Secretary Castro. Looking back at your mayorship of my hometown, San Antonio, Texas, how did you navigate being a major policy creator with a significant conservative population within the largest conservative state, but also one of the largest cities in the country? And then the second part is, in addition, what advice would you have for others who are looking and serving their communities at a local city level when it comes to housing and urban development?
Well, Secretary Fudge's experience may have been similar. You know, at the local level, you kind of have the wind at your back compared to the federal level. I mean, to begin with, at least in San Antonio, we ran in nonpartisan elections. So you didn't run as a Democrat or Republican, and when you do, that automatically people, fall into one camp or another. That means once you're in office, it generally allows you to try and build those bridges. And I think that she said it very well, that you have to listen to one another and find those areas of common ground where you're able to work. I thought that President Biden tried to do that last night very, very compellingly on a number of different issues. He had, what he called this unity agenda for America with 4 different ways that he thought, Democrats and Republicans would work together. But especially in a state like Texas, and other places like it, that was necessary. The local government, the infrastructure of local government made that easier to do, to accomplish in a meaningful way than I think a lot of state legislatures or in Washington. I applaud, folks who have served in Congress and trying to make that happen there because it's tougher.
And my question was, I'm sorry.
I guess the other half of it was, what advice do you have for local leaders?
For local lead, he's asking me for local leaders or policymakers. I would say if you don't really want to be a public servant or an elected official, at least get into policy. Policy drives all of what we do. And policy is nonpartisan. So get into policy. But the other thing I would say is that opportunities always come. You just have to be prepared for them. So take the time now and do the work. Start to create your own networks. Start to figure out who's going the same direction that you want to go. Start to understand who can lead you to a place. Maybe it's Secretary Castro, since he's on this campus. If it's something you want to do, find that person that can point you in the direction. But most of it is just being prepared. Do the work. Make sure that you are ready when the opportunity comes, because they come.
Wonderful. Yeah, we'll take one question, then do a time check. Yeah.
Hello. First off, thank you for speaking to us. My question is, do you believe that it is fundamentally possible to end homelessness in America?
I'm sorry.
Do you believe that it is fundamentally possible to end homelessness in America?
I do. Let me tell you what. If I didn't have hope, I couldn't do what I do. And I believe at some point that the country is going to wake up and really realize what a crisis it is. I talk about it every day, every single day. I talk to mayors about it, governors about it every single day. And what is happening across the country now is people are ashamed when they drive. They are ashamed when they realize that kids are coming to school dirty because they live in their cars. And so it is becoming more and more visible every day because the numbers are so big. So I do think we can. I think we must. I don't know that it'll ever be zero, but I know that we can do a lot better than we're doing now.
Secretary Castro, as I'm sure you know, San Antonio is one of the most economically segregated cities in the United States. But this isn't just limited to San Antonio. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you see reforming zoning laws and decreasing economic segregation in housing and urban cities.
No, I think we both would agree that local communities have a lot of work they need to do with their land use regulations. Near the end of the Obama administration, the White House released what it called a toolkit of like 20 or 25 different measures that local governments could take to make it more affordable to develop affordable housing in their communities. You often run into this NIMBYism that expresses itself in zoning regulations and other planning regulations that has the effect of making it almost impossible for any affordable or housing that's affordable to low income or sometimes even middle class folks to be developed in places. And this is a problem in a lot of cities. It's an even bigger problem in suburbs. And so I know y'all are doing work as well on regionalism and trying to get these suburbs to work with cities to provide more affordable housing opportunity.
First, a huge thank you to you both for coming today. I'm I'm from the state of Connecticut, where single-family housing is allowed as of right on a little over 91% of the land in the state, but in only 2.5% can you build three-family housing by right, and it's even less as the number of residents goes higher. And very much in relation to the last question as well, I'm wondering, Secretary Fudge, if you could speak to how, you mentioned supply of housing and affordability, and local zoning is fundamentally intertwined with these issues. Can you discuss how this informs HUD and how the federal government sees its role in addressing this issue through long-term policy and planning?
Sure. This morning, I had the opportunity to meet with 5 county commissioners from different counties around the DMV to talk to them about how they work across borders to create an environment where we can build affordable housing. There really is no affordable housing in this country today because the prices have gotten so high that an average person cannot really afford to buy a home. I traveled an awful lot, which we both have. But just to give you some idea of how far we have come, I was in San Francisco. The median sales price of a house in San Francisco is about $1.5 million. It's $1 million in Seattle, $800,000 in Denver. It's almost that much here. And so until we can come together in a regional fashion, especially in this kind of an area, to start to talk about how we cross borders and allow resources that HUD and the federal government have, we're never going to address the problem because you can't do it in a silo in one small little area. Because people need to be able to move to different communities, communities of choice, communities of opportunity, communities that are near jobs, communities that are near transportation. So we have to look at it from 30,000 feet. We can't look at it just in a very narrow view. But we do have resources. Now we have resources. And this is what I was saying to them this morning. Cities, counties, governors, et cetera, have more money today than they have ever had from the federal government. They are flush with resources from the CARES Act, from the COVID Act, from Build Back Better, from the Rescue Plan, from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Plan, and then what the president is asking for in his budgets. That is part of their problem. They have so much money, they don't know where to start. But I'm impressing upon them. I spoke to the National Conference of Mayors. I've spoken to the governors. I speak to anybody who will listen. I talk with them about how we need to start to address this problem. Because I'm going to go back to where I started. If we don't, we're never going to deal with inflation. We're never going to deal with things like homelessness. We're never going to address any of those issues until we deal with this. And not only just you look at it from that perspective, but just think about the people in this country who have no home. A home is the major determinant of where you want to be in the rest of your life. Your zip code or your stability. So why would we allow people to start their lives in a place where we know is going to make their lives difficult? So there are so many reasons we need to address homes. But most of it is just because that's what we ought to be doing as a country. Not allowing poverty to create a lifelong sentence for people who are housed insecure.
All right. I think one last question.
Hello, my name is Rohin. I'm a organizer. I work on, work with renters as well as unhoused people, both in DC and back home in the Bay Area in California. And thank you for being here today. I wanted to ask, when we look at people who are non-property owners in the country, whether they are unhoused people or are renters, which are in a growing and, especially for people in our age demographic, will continue to be a growing percentage of people, especially among people of color, how do we transition to a more rights-based approach to looking at that, especially when we're looking at those populations and really centering the rights that property owners have that these people do not have, and expanding that kind of rights-based conversation to renters and unhoused people when we look at housing policy, and what are things that HUD can do to that end to encourage local jurisdictions to adopt more tenant protection policies and things like that. Thank you.
One word, that is vote. Put people in office who will hear you. This country was built on racism. That's why a lot of the things you're talking about, only property owners can make decisions about, because at one point we were not property owners. And it's gone, and it's just been a continuum. Nobody has tried to change it. Same thing with women. Women couldn't own property. And so it was only the property owners who could make certain kinds of decisions. I think that you're right. We need to be addressing it, but I don't know of anyone who is. So I suggest again, get involved in policy and start to push those, because I don't know of anybody having those discussions. And I don't know why we're not, because you're absolutely right, it makes an awful lot of sense. A lot of people don't want to own homes. A lot of people can't afford to own homes. And so the only thing they have, the only thing that makes us all equal on one day is your vote. And you have to push and hold accountable your elected officials. You know, people, they don't ever go to a school board meeting, they don't ever go to a council meeting, they don't talk to their mayor, whatever it may be. But if you don't, they never hear you. So your silence is acquiescence. Your silence is saying it's okay. So stop being silent and let them hear what you think. Not only will it make them better, it will make you better.
Wonderful. Well, Secretary Fudge, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, even more importantly, for bringing to bear your expertise and your passion and compassion as Secretary of HUD in these very challenging times for so many people out there who need housing opportunity. Let's give Secretary Fudge one more round of applause. And thank y'all. I hope that you'll tune in for our next session on March 16th, and we'll let you know about the guests soon.